Good morning, everybody. We got a great show coming your way today on GoJo and Golic. So, roster cutdown day was yesterday. We will talk about all of that, any notable news that we have to go through. Plus, Andy Staples is going to join us to talk college football and DraftKings Network. We have a special surprise for you guys. New show coming to the network. We will have a guest on to tell you more about that. So make sure you stay tuned and enjoy a great show.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to GoJo and Golic. Mike Golic Jr., Mike Golic Sr., and Jesse Cofield holding it down for us still in the DraftKings studio in Boston. Great show coming up. As always, download, subscribe, rate, and review us. Leave us a 5-star rating, and check us out live Monday through Friday from 8 to 10 a.m. Eastern on the DraftKings Network. In addition to the great guests that Jesse mentioned are coming up, Kelsey Conway from the Cincinnati Enquirer covering the Cincinnati Bengals, going to join us in about 10 minutes here on the show. Since, Dad, amidst a sea of cutdowns yesterday, there is some news that we heard from Bengals head coach Zach Taylor about Jamar Chase's availability ahead of week 1. He's been back out at practice. They expect him to be ready to go for them there. So we'll check in with her about that and what that looks like now for the Bengals after a bit of an awkward hold-in situation with their star receiver.
Yeah, it does look like he'll be available. Looks like maybe they'll get the deal done at right around what Justin Jefferson money is. So I think either way, listen, Bengal fans just want to see him on the field. They know he's going to get paid eventually, so they're not as concerned about that. They're just concerned about him being on the field, and he was back practicing lightly, though he was practicing. So that's a good signal as they go in to start the season.
Yep, a good sign for the Bengals as they get ready to start their year. But, Dad, we know yesterday for a lot of players around the league, it was what we talked about. It was either one of the best days of your life when you find out by not hearing any news about your roster status that you have made the team and accomplished your dream, or in my dad's case, you find out because your father-in-law posed as a reporter to go get that information out of a team secretary in a building, which is still amazing to consider even back in the 1980s when it happened. Or you're on the other side of this, a side that, you certainly lived at a couple of different points. I lived at 3 different points. It was the only reality I knew where you get that call that unfortunately, hey, come bring your playbook, come see coach. Hey, you're on our short list of guys. You had a really good camp. It's the tweet we saw a lot yesterday, Dad, about players that were cut or waived or released at the end of training camp is so-and-so had a really strong camp and will be under consideration for a bunch of teams, but they will no longer be playing for this one. So it's certainly a tough scene there, Dad, and it's one of those moments where you do feel those guys because there's some guys that are never going to play football again after what happened yesterday. And I'd say again, that does not devalue the experience that you have had. It does not devalue you have accomplished. Ross Tucker talks about this all the time. These guys are already usually the 1% of the 1%, the guys that were the best player in the history of their hometown or the history of their high school now get shown the door and have to figure out what they're going to do after that. And for some guys, you keep hammering away at the thing, man. Like I knew I had 3 years, and you probably have that window where you've got an opportunity to try and keep latching on a roster. Stay ready to try and get on a practice squad and then work your way on there. There's a ton of success stories about players overcoming those odds, being cut multiple times and working their way back.
Well, you're going to get both sides of this story. You're going to get the worst side of it, where there are going to be a number of players whose careers are over. They will not put on shoulder pads again. You kind of know that going in. It's your last chance that you won't play anymore. And others, there will be guys that got cut today that in a couple of years will be Pro Bowl players. They will make a team. They will get a chance. They will start to play, and then they'll be in a Pro Bowl, and they'll be one of these amazing stories we talk about an undrafted free agent who gets cut multiple times and then becomes a Pro Bowl player. So you're going to get both sides of it. The biggest difference of when I played to now, even when you played, and going on to now, is you do have the chance for as a practice squad player. When I played, you got cut, you were done. You could go to another team, but you had to go to another team on the 53-man roster. So you just kind of waited around, worked out on your own. And unfortunately, I didn't have to go in that situation of getting cut at the end of camp to kind of wait. But that's what you had to do in my day, as they say, is you had to wait. You couldn't play anywhere. There was no practice squads. You had to wait to get a call, and sometimes the call came. Most of the times, it didn't. So at least now there is the, hey, we're going to cut you. But then you go through for those that don't know, you go through a 24-hour period where you're on the waiver wire, and then they can re-sign you on the practice squad. And the practice squad has grown over the years. It can include veterans as well as first and second year players. It is, and that's good because the roster should be bigger. They should actually, the game day roster, quite honestly, should be bigger than the 46 it drops down to from 53 during the regular season. It should be bigger, but you do have a lot of players. You have hundreds of players who get cut, but you also have a decent amount that get signed back to practice squads. And if you're on a practice squad, you still have a chance. And you have the spring league, the UFL, to continue to try and show your wares. So there are enough areas to where, you had other leagues to try as well. So you had a 3-year window to keep trying to live out your dream.
Yeah, Dad, you mentioned the practice squad rules for people out there because this has become an important part of building your team in the interim and having some of those veteran guys ready. It's 16 players plus a 17th player who's part of the International Pathway Program that you can have rostered on there. And as you mentioned, you have obviously players that haven't accrued any NFL experience, free agent players that were on the active list for fewer than 9 of their games in one accrued season, a max of 10 free agent players who have 2 or more accrued seasons, and then a max of 6 players who have no limitations on the number of earned or accrued seasons. So those are the real ones. You can have 6 guys that are veteran players that have played ball in this league for a long time that you put on that practice squad roster. And once you're there, any team can sign them at any time. So there is that risk, but there's usually a reason you wind up in that spot. Some of the notable cut names, Dad, yesterday of players whose names you've heard who, listen, it might not be an undrafted player who ends up going on to Pro Bowl status later on who gets the cut today. There are some talented guys that found their way out, former top picks. Desmond Ridder, who Atlanta thought at one time might have a chance to be the quarterback of their future, got cut in Arizona. Bailey Zappi in New England, the odd man out, is now Drake May and Joe Milton are there backing up Jacoby Brissett. Kadarius Toney, who 2 years ago authored that 65-yard punt return in Super Bowl 57 that helped lift the Chiefs up. We know an abysmal season last year and a training camp where he was both injured and ineffective out there. But then, Dad, you get guys, Lewis Cine in Minnesota, first-round pick from 2022, shown the door for that team, hadn't been able to get on the field much due to injury there. Caleb Farley in Tennessee, a first-rounder in 2021, had only played 12 games over the last 3 years and was injured a bunch in this camp. So you look around at guys like that, and that's what we always see in this league, Dad. If you had especially that one next to your name, you're going to get an abundant amount of chances. But we do see teams, especially ones where new regime in Tennessee, there was a new defense that came in a couple of years ago in Minnesota along with that new regime, and you're a lot more willing to move on and say, hey, we've already sunk the cost in here, but we're going to go forward and build our roster a different way.
Yeah, that's so you do see from the undrafted free agent where sometimes you're expected that they get cut to, as you just mentioned, with Caleb Farley and Lewis Cine, former first-round picks who, for whatever reason, like for Cine, he had a compound fracture of his leg his first year, second year trying to catch up to the Brian Flores defense, and just wasn't able to do it. Sometimes it's injury, sometimes they're overdrafted for the position they were drafted in, and they just can't make the transition to the NFL. But to Mike's point, and he's right, when you have a one next to your name, you're going to get the benefit of the doubt, and you're going to get chances somewhere else, rather be signed on a practice squad or signed to another team's 53-man roster. You're going to get more chances than an undrafted free agent getting chances.
I think probably the most interesting one, Dad, is looking at the Patriots situation, just going all in on the youth movement and saying, hey, Bailey Zappi, who started games for you there, who at some time was really the one people thought might usurp Mac Jones while he was still on the roster, your only player that had meaningful experience under center there is now gone. So it's Jacoby Brissett leading the charge there, but then after that, it's certainly Drake May, who you took third overall, and then the talented rookie Joe Milton, who, if the consistency ever gets there, it'll be great, but the howitzer attached to his arm will keep them entertained in practice for days and days to come. For more on some of the big notes of NFL training camp here, Dad, let's head out to Cincinnati right now. We mentioned for the Bengals, they have been one of the teams, will they, won't they, with their star receiver this offseason. And so for more on that, Kelsey Conway, who covers the team for the Cincinnati Enquirer, kind enough to join us here now. And Kelsey, we heard from Zach Taylor yesterday. He expects Ja'Marr Chase to be out there in week 1. What more can you tell us about the situation?
Yeah, well, it took about 3 follow-up questions just to make sure that was the case, because he surprisingly returned to practice on Sunday, and it was a closed practice to the media, so none of us knew, but we didn't know what level of participation he was doing, if it was just the first practice. And Zach Taylor said yesterday he expects him to play against the Patriots in week 1. He's confident it will happen. I think that Ja'Marr there's no reason to believe that Ja'Marr wouldn't play. I don't think that was something that might have ever been in the cards. It's more of a matter of the next 10 days just being really important for the Bengals and Ja'Marr to get a deal done.
And that deal done, is it just like CeeDee Lamb took less than Justin Jefferson? Is Ja'Marr Chase looking to get at least 1 penny more than Justin Jefferson in this deal?
Well, we don't know exactly what Ja'Marr is asking for, but if you read between the tea leaves here, last year before the end of the season, we asked Ja'Marr, are you going to wait until Justin Jefferson signs his deal before you start negotiations with the Bengals? And he smiled and he said, yeah. So there's a reason he was waiting. He wanted to see what the market was. The market has been set. And I think CeeDee Lamb coming in and getting that deal, it just reassures to the Bengals that the market isn't going to change. Like, if you want a premier receiver, this is what you're going to have to pay for them. And I was honestly kind of shocked at how close CeeDee Lamb's was to Justin Jefferson. So if you're Ja'Marr Chase, like, why would you not want to be in that exact same ballpark, if not more? But there was a reason he wanted to wait to see what Justin Jefferson got before his negotiation started.
Obviously, he changes the dynamic on that offense a ton, but as you mentioned, it just come back to practice on Sunday. What had the offense without him looked like through much of camp as Joe Burrow was returning from injury?
Not a lot of down the field passes, I'll tell you that. But, with Ja'Marr out, it was hard to gauge, what exactly the offense is looking like with a healthy Joe Burrow. But you just go back to what they were on the field together, and that was Ja'Marr is always open. He's always a vertical threat down the field. And so during training camp, it was a lot of passes to Charlie Jones, Andre Oshavas in the slot. T. Higgins, of course, was a really good player in training camp. He had a good camp, and their connection looks better than ever. But you just miss the vertical deep threat that Ja'Marr Chase is. And I know that the Bengals are looking to feature Ja'Marr in more ways. So I'm sure Zach Taylor was really excited to get him on the field and have him run through some of those new plays that they want to have him in the offense. But from what I know is that he's been involved in the meetings and in the walkthroughs. So that's always a good thing, because it's not like he's going to be coming back to practice and not really understanding what's going on. And he was also at every single practice but one, watching from the sidelines, engaging with his teammates. So I think now that he's back, him and Joe Burrow, I don't think they'll have any issues getting on the same page early in the season.
So with Joe Burrow, 4 seasons, 2 of them he played just 10 games. The other 2 he played 16. Had the knee his rookie year, the wrist last year. You can't really count appendicitis as an NFL injury. But is there I don't know if it's a worry so much that of his getting injured, his maybe his size and his durability?
No, I don't think so. And he also gained 10 pounds of muscle this offseason. So he did a lot of work in terms of nutrition, and he was always very dialed in on what he was eating. But from what I gathered is he made some significant changes to his diet in terms of when he was eating and the type of workouts he was doing. So he looks stronger and bigger than he ever has in his career. And the hope is that he's able to sustain some of the hits that he's been taking. But I don't think that any of the injuries have been correlated to anything with his physical shape. So like the calf strain was just a situation where he was wearing a sleeve on it 2 days before, and then he went down and injured it. So I think for him with the injuries, it's a matter of if something is tight and something's bothering him, he said he's now going to be more careful and just understanding that he could potentially hurt himself worse, which is what happened with the calf last year. So I think it's more of a matter of him just learning and maturing in that way, as opposed to anything wrong with him not being a certain size that he needs to be.
Yeah, and I mean his size, his actual physical size at 6'4", is good size. But he is talking about the mortality. I know he did bring up the mortality of an NFL player.
Yeah, and that was one of the most interesting things he said is he's usually very quiet and doesn't say a lot of things that will grab your attention like that. So for him to acknowledge that, I thought that was really interesting.
Kelsey, we know roster cutdown day was yesterday. Not a ton of surprises, I think, but for the Bengals, anything that jumped out to you? And is there any position in particular that now that there are other players out there that we know are available that the Bengals may target here in the immediate aftermath?
I think the Bengals will add to the running back room. You'll see over the next couple of days probably a lot of stories written about Samaje Perine, and could that be a reunion for the Bengals because of how successful he was in the role he played for the Bengals when they went to the Super Bowl. So I think keep your eye on the back end of the running back room. I mean, they have Chase Brown and Zach Moss, who are going to be the 1-2 punch, but they love Samaje Perine, and I would not be shocked if they take a look at the defensive end position, because they had to put Myles Murphy, their first round pick from last year, on IR, and Cam Sample was also placed on IR during training camp. So they're a little bit thin right now at defensive end behind Sam Hubbard and Trey Hendrickson.
Yeah, what talk about that defense for a minute. This was not a very good defense on yards per game if you go by the normal stats, and what they've done to improve this defense and how it's looked.
Yeah, actually, I think that towards the back half of training camp, when they went to the Bears and then practiced against the Colts, I thought Cincinnati's defense looked like the unit you were used to seeing them before last season, in terms of just not a lot of miscommunication on the back end. Like last year, it was just so weird because you weren't used to seeing Lou Anarumo's group feel so disconnected. Like there were players, I go back to the game against the Steelers where, George Pickens is wide open, and it just didn't look like Cincinnati's defense. And they had Geno Stone come in, they brought Von Bell back. And from talking to coaches on the staff, like those two guys have made a world of a difference of just cleaning up the communication. And they feel like because of the improved play in the secondary, it will impact the linebackers, that they expect Logan Wilson and Jermaine Pratt to have a bigger year. And then up front, those guys up front. They feel like it's a trickle-down effect, and overall, they feel like their defense will be a lot better because the communication is a ton better in the back end. And Dax Hill earning that starting cornerback spot opposite of Cam Taylor-Britt, it just looks like the group is coming together a little bit more at this time last year than this time last year.
Awesome stuff. As always, you guys can check her out covering the Bengals for the Cincinnati Enquirer at Kelsey L. Conway on Twitter as well. Kelsey, we appreciate the time and the update. Thanks so much. We'll talk to you soon, all right?
Thanks so much for having me on, guys.
Thanks, Kelsey.
Dad, you're right to bring up the defense at the end there. That was a unit where you look last year, missed a ton of tackles, huge jump in that from year to year, and a lot of people looked at that safety group that got the influx of talent and experience back into that unit to kind of steady the ship there, because you're right, looking at the Bengals and the AFC North in particular, that was my concern coming into this season was, would you be able to go out there and right the ship on that side? Everyone's worried about Joe Burrow. I think for the most part, as Kelsey mentioned, that slots back in. Him and Jamar Chase are blue chip stock at this level, but that defense has to show, especially against a team like the Ravens and certainly against a team like the Browns, who on their best day want to go and get up, get after you, and throw bodies at you in the run game, that you're going to be able to rally and tackle.
Yeah, this was a team that obviously struggled both against the pass and the run, and to the tune they picked up a couple of D tackles in two of their first 4 picks were defensive tackles to try and help shore up that play against the run and putting pressure on the quarterback. So you're right, you don't question the offensive side of the ball. You look at the injuries of Burrow and hope that doesn't continue, like I had said. But as far as the talent is there. It's that defensive side of the ball, I think, that really needs to step up.
There's no doubt about it. That group, a ton of pressure on their shoulders as we head into this season. I mentioned the missed tackle numbers last year. The run game defense, 31st in the league in stopping the run in the red zone, according to DVOA, with our friend Aaron Schatz over at the Fantasy Network. So a lot of difficulties that they need to remedy on that side of the ball there. Coming up next, though, big news out of the NFL league office yesterday about some new money potentially coming into league pockets. Next on GoJo and Golic. Welcome back to GoJo and Golic. Mike Golic Jr., Mike Golic Sr., and Jesse Cofield. We appreciate Kelsey Conway stopping by to talk some Bengals a little while ago, Dad, but let's talk some money now for the NFL. We know the league built on the pursuit of the almighty dollar at the highest level here, and yet surprisingly, they are the last league in professional sports to now adopt private equity and the ability for private equity firms to buy in to the sport. NFL owners voted on Tuesday to allow select private equity firms to invest in up to 10% of a team's stake. The initial firms include Ares Management, Sixth Street Partners, and Arctos Partners, as well as a group that includes Dynasty Equity and some other, venture capital firms and investment banking firms there. But the NFL is the last major sports league to allow this, as rising valuations around the league, Dad, have made it harder for one person to buy a team anymore. Long gone are the days where it would be one of the families that goes out here and buys the team for a few $100 million now. We've seen ownership groups, most recently with the Washington Commanders, put together to have to buy this. And so as the costs of new stadiums continue to go up and everything else, I'm not surprised that the NFL continues to go this route. And certainly this is a lot different tone and tenor in terms of how it feels and how I perceive it than the headlines we got not too long ago of private equity sniffing around college football, where there it was up to even 20% we heard of a conference like the Big 12, and we know that space far less equipped and far less used to it than this. What was your reaction to this news?
Oh, I mean, I wouldn't say the rich get richer. They're already, the valuations are going up, but their ability to have to liquidate and have liquid money available to them, the highest worth of a professional team, not just football, a professional team in the world is the Dallas Cowboys at over $10 billion. So you're right. You see families that own teams, they bought them years, sometimes decades ago. You got them for in the hundreds of millions. Now it's going to cost you in the billions. So you see more groups, but 10% a stake gives you money to play with. Remember, any guaranteed money that's given in contracts has to be put in escrow. So you have to give up that money. It has to be in escrow. Like that was one of the things talked about with Deshaun Watson, that the Haslams had to put $230 million just for his guaranteed money alone in escrow. So this gives them the ability to have, some money, some liquid money laying around, for lack of a better term, to do things like that or use it for whatever they want to use it for, while still having, controlling the team. It's not like the thought in college where these, private equity firms are gonna have a big say in what's going on. They're not gonna have a say in what's going on NFL teams in owning just 10% of them. They are minority owners, and I'm sure they will be treated that way by the majority owners, the big name families.
Yeah, and we've seen, and we mentioned, this is the last league in North American sports here. Major League Baseball, the NHL, the NBA all allow private equity and all allow them to own a stake of up to 30%. So 3 times as much as what the NFL is doing here. The NFL obviously not hurting for cash. And Dad, you're right. It's going to be a palatable enough way. And these are also business people who are used to controlling the things that go on in their building. This is not going to be a situation where you worry about someone else coming in and dictating the terms for them, even in this sport. A sport that at the NFL level has already operated ruthlessly enough to draw the envy of the English Premier League. When that league started overseas and they decided in European soccer and English soccer, we want to do something that makes more money, they based a lot of that model off looking at the NFL. So this has been the gold standard for a while. It's why I won't freak out about this the way I freaked out about this money going into college, where, Dad, you don't have billionaire owners and business people at the helm of this. You have decisions made for these schools by university presidents. You have a lapse and an absence of leadership overall in the sport that would make it ripe in a place for these financial people to come in there and all of a sudden change this in a way that would make it wholly unrecognizable. I get that sport is becoming increasingly more like its NFL counterpart, but it has a vacuum in leadership in the ways that the NFL does, at least in this business side, that to me create a very different dynamic than what you would have right now with this happening in the NFL at this point in their life cycle.
Without a doubt, the business acumen is much different in the NFL. And you got to think these private firms buying in, this is akin to buying a stock high, right? I mean, you're always taught buy it low. Well, the low stock in the NFL is gone. I mean, it is gone. Teams are all in the billions of dollars. So these private equity firms are buying stock high, still betting on the NFL that the valuations are going to go even higher and they'll make some money on it.
And something interesting, guys, team owners or their immediate family members may invest up to 3% in a fund. So I thought that was kind of interesting, too. It was double dipping, baby.
Oh, yeah. I would say the least surprising thing in the world that there would be a little bit of like wink, wink, nudge, nudge going on in this for everyone involved to also collect a little bit.
Now you can have your kids you're the owner. Now you can have your kids invest up to 3% in one of these funds. It's just a way to keep spreading it around there in the family.
Yeah, it's a reminder that while this will be billed as, hey, it's more money for, the rising player contracts and the stadium's getting built, it's just to make these rich people even more rich. This is not to help or better you, the fan. It almost never is. Jesse, speaking of people financially strapped in an interesting situation, though, let's talk about the 49ers here and their interesting window that we know is at least changing this year with the last year of the Brock Purdy rookie deal.
Yeah, God, I mean, we're still on Ayuk watch. That has not changed. Big questions about contracts for multiple stars for the 49ers. So Trent Williams, who's been holding out, and then, like you said, Brock Purdy. So we know the cap can be moved around, doesn't really mean much, but at the moment, the 49ers are $38.9 million over the cap for 2025, according to overthecap.com. Extensions obviously can help with some of that, but do you guys feel like the Super Bowl window for the 49ers is perhaps closing a little faster than we thought here?
I'd say the realities of the situation are showing up a lot faster, Dad, although we kind of assumed this year would have that extra sense of urgency to it for all the reasons that Jesse just mentioned. So if they go and get the extensions done that they can with Brandon Ayuk and Trent Williams right now, you can play some games to smooth out that cap number for this year, but you're always shuffling that money around and going to have to come up for it at some point, the Brock Purdy extension being the biggest bit of financial calculus they have to do. So this doesn't change the way I view the 49ers season. It's always felt like their eggs are in the basket for this year, and while they'll stay in the mix, they're going to have to make it look a lot different after this.
Well, it's creative accounting, right? I mean, they're almost $39 million over what would be the cap next year. But they don't have to worry about that till next year. But that's when you do extensions, spread out the life of a contract. You'll have to sign Brock Purdy as well to a big deal. You already have Bosa as the highest paid edge rusher. You have Christian McCaffrey as the highest paid running back. If you pay Ayuk, you're going to pay him probably over $25 million a year. It's just of how creative you can get with your cap numbers. It looks like a big number of $39 million over for last year, but again, with the extensions and the way you can spread it out, you can make it work. But we always talked about this team, especially on the offensive side with the amount of talent. How long can you hold on to the talent? Well, you can hold on to it certainly as long as your rookie quarterback is on his rookie pay scale. And though this is a 7th-rounder pay scale, not even a 1st-rounder pay scale, but so what you can do before you have to sign your quarterback, it will be different after. Can they hold on to everybody? So it's creative accounting, it's extensions, it's paying guys big signing bonus checks to do extensions. Say, here's your money now so we can spread your money over time. And it becomes kind of a year-to-year thing.
And there are going to be some casualties along the way. They're not going to be able to keep everyone when they reverse polarity on this Brock Purdy deal. You are going from the ultimate bargain bin deal to now a guy that's going to set the next quarterback standard and contracts going forward. And so there's going to be guys you can't keep. And so it's about identifying the guys that you can't live without. And again, I get he is 36, but I keep coming back to you need to figure out this Trent Williams thing. For a team that was one of the best offenses in the NFL and empty last year, needs that pass protection in a group that doesn't have a lot of studs. Trent Williams led all tackles in ESPN's pass block win rate and didn't allow a single sack last season. I get he is older, but it's not like the shine is off his performance by any stretch of the imagination. You need that foundation in front of your smaller quarterback to try and make the whole rest of this beautiful Kyle Shanahan engine run. So 49ers got to get on that right now and try and make something happen. But coming up next, we got dad name politics in the world of sports. LeBron James lays down the gauntlet to his son. What do we think about that? Next on GoJo and Golic.
Welcome back to GoJo and Golic, a show where we know a thing or two about the father-son dynamic. So, of course, we couldn't skip this little tidbit from LeBron James about what it's going to be like to be on the court with Bronny.
Have you thought through, not relationship, because you always be his dad, he'll always be his son, but what's your working relationship? Is he going to call you dad at practice in the locker room?
No, we already laid that. No, he can't. We already laid that down. He cannot call me dad in the workplace. All right. Once we leave out of the practice facility and the gates close, I could be dad again. In the car, if we ride together. At home, I could be dad. No, he got to call me like 2-3 or Bron. Or, GOAT if he wants to. That's up to him. I mean, it's up to him.
You guys have been doing this for years. GoJo, you say dad. I feel like it's kind of, it's weird. Like, everyone knows he's your dad. Why can't you call him dad?
Oh, and LeBron himself is such a dad that he couldn't resist that little joke at the end of like, maybe he could call me GOAT. It's the same, my son needs to respect me bit that my dad has been doing for years. And so it's nice to see LeBron has aged into the dad jokes incredibly well. But Dad, you and I went through this when we were at ESPN getting ready to start the morning show together. There was an exec who had the thought of, hey, should you call your dad Mike on air? I do believe it was truly well-intentioned at that time trying to kind of distance me from the nepotism thing and make it a little less awkward on that front. But we both sort of looked at each other in that meeting and we're just like, no, I'm going to call him dad. And that was sort of the end of the discussion because it would have made it incredibly weird. I never called you Mike a day in your life.
Yeah, that would have been, and I do believe it was good intention to try and get away from the nepotism thing. But it sounded ridiculous. I'm the dad, you're the son. I mean, call me dad. I'll call you son or I'll call you Mike. I mean, but it does open the door to maybe you calling me different things now, with LeBron giving Bronny choices to calling me different. Like most of my career was in Philly and I was number 90. You can call me 90. How about 90?
Dad, we talked about this the other day. I'm not even sure most of the people listening would get that reference to your playing days. I think most of them still think of you now as the broadcaster and as you'd have a better chance of me calling you like HOF for the Radio Hall of Fame thing. And even that's not going to happen because, again, I am not going to come out here and inflate your ego the same way Bronny's not going to go out at practice and be calling his dad GOAT. That's not going to happen.
Yeah, so it's just dad. It's nothing else. There's nothing else you think you can call me, sir. Great one. I mean,
and you know what?
You've never.
Well, Bronny had a better chance of this with Bronny because Bronny's like, what, 19, 20 years old?
Yeah.
Like he's still a young man coming up in all of this. I'm 34. I've been calling you dad for a long time, both personally and professionally. And it's one of those things. I get the professional differences here, obviously. You and I were doing a show where the father-son relationship is part of the sell. How many notes did we get over the years from people who had the chance to work with their mom or their dad or their kids about how cool it was to watch this experience? It would have been weird as hell if I was just sitting here calling you Mike. That's honestly one of the weirdest parts of pro sports in general, is going from players calling the coach to players calling the coach by their first name. As that dynamic changes, let alone doing the parent version of that would be wild.
So we joke around. You call me dad. That's the most natural thing to do in this relationship. But what does Bronny call his dad? What does he? What if he's not going to call him dad on the court or dad at practice? What's he going to call him?
He should call him dad. This is so stupid.
I think this sounds good. He's gonna call him dad.
So much has been made of the fact that it's a father-son duo here.
Yes.
And everybody knows it. LeBron James is one of the most famous athletes on the planet. Why wouldn't he call him dad? This just seems so stupid. I can't. It's one of those head-scratching moments.
I agree. There is zero wrong with Bronny calling his dad on the court, at practice, in the facility. I mean, you're right. Everybody has talked about LeBron wanting to play with his son. Now it's happening. He gets to play with his son. So why would we stop the father-son talk?
Yeah.
Someone in Bronny's social media team needs to get the clip up from Step Brothers yesterday. I'm not going to call him dad. not even if there's a fire, and let that thing ride. So free game for Bronny and whoever is running the social accounts. I'm sure he is, because he's a young person who's savvy with that stuff. So while that'll be a ton of fun watching that, Jesse, let's talk about another young person coming into a very interesting situation here. Cooper Flagg, the Duke star, we expect to take men's college basketball by storm this year, already inking some pretty impressive deals of his own.
Yeah, he's signed a shoe deal with New Balance. Staying local with the New England brand, okay, for him. Not sure the numbers on this one, guys, but would you be surprised if this is one of the bigger deals ever for a college kid? I mean, it very well could be.
Well, I mean, these are all like the first deals for college kids of these nature. Like, we haven't seen a ton of these, Dad. So this is sort of taking what's always existed, because as we learned in that FBI probe years ago, the underbelly of college basketball has long been governed by shoe companies who have used improper benefits to lure players to the schools that those shoe companies sponsor. And so now that we have all this happening in the light of day, you can have these more overt deals for a company like New Balance that doesn't have as many collegiate apparel partnerships, but wants to go and plant their flag with a player, pun fully intended, who's going to have 1 year on loan to Duke and then go be a star in the NBA.
Plus, I just think the factory is 25 miles from his childhood home in Newport. He said his mom used to go to the tent sale for back to school shopping to get New Balance stuff, and now he's one of the faces of it. I think it's cool. And listen, there is zero wrong with it. This guy is, especially coming off last year's draft, where that was talked about as one of the worst drafts in a long time. This guy is by far and away the projected and presumptive number one pick in, after his 1 year at Duke, to be the number one pick in the draft. And all the things that come along with it are only getting bigger and better. So, man, more power to him. Sign the big deals.
I did think it was interesting because a lot of people asked these questions early on when NIL started to become a thing, of how would this eventually affect schools' apparel deals, affect the deals that they already have on campus. Duke has been a Nike school since the early 90s and has a well-worn relationship there. And I did see it reported over at CBS Sports by Isaac Trotter that apparently anything he is doing related to Duke, he's still going to be wearing Nike gear. So, Dad, he's going to be wearing Nike on the court with Duke, but this is much more about New Balance securing a star player for when he does turn pro to have him ready to go.
Yeah, and he obviously, New Balance knows that, and New Balance knows they only have to deal a year with him doing that. So, and they're willing to take that risk, as they say. I'm still amazed. This kid, as great as we're talking about him, he reclassified. He should be a senior in high school this year. He should be a senior in high school. And he reclassified to get his year in college to go to the NBA. So he is a year younger than anybody, obviously, who didn't reclassify. And he's the best player. It's amazing, this kid's talent at 6'9".
Yeah, we've seen plenty of players make waves of doing this in both college football and college basketball. The difference is for basketball, to your point, he reclassifies, he's a year younger, and then after one season in college, he's going to go off and he's going to play in the NBA. We went through the USA basketball run this summer where he was part of that select group going and playing against Team USA, and he was the story coming out of that practice of how comfortable he already looked on the court with all these guys. So for anyone asking, hey, is New Balance maybe jumping the gun on this, as they have reinserted themselves into the scene in a big way. We've seen the ads run with Kawhi and Cam Brink and a lot of the players, Tyrese Maxey, that they've all made a part of their group. Now going and trying to grab the next hot young talent makes a ton of sense when you seem to know, like everyone does, this guy's going to be the next big thing.
See, the New Balance everybody thought was just the old guy's shoe. It's not. It's the cool shoe now. It's a cool shoe, the young generation.
Yeah, when you say it like that, it definitely makes it sound really cool. You in particular, it makes it sound really cool to say it's the next it shoe. Although, as they've said in the ad, we've got next, so maybe we'll see with that. Coming up next, as college football's conference realignment continues to spin, who's got next in the Big 12? We'll talk about a potential big shakeup next.
Welcome back to GoJo and Golic. Mike Golic Jr., Mike Golic Sr., and Jesse Cofield here. We had plenty of conference shuffling in the offseason, guys, and we have whispers of another potential switch-up. Basketball powerhouse UConn allegedly eyeing a marriage with the Big 12. So they boast back-to-back championships for basketball, but a long way to go on the gridiron. UConn's win total right now sits at 4.5. So let's cash it or trash it. How about it? Cash it or trash it is presented by DraftKings. Stay tuned because you'll hear more about DraftKings and all it has to offer throughout the show. DraftKings, the crown is yours. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Age and eligibility restrictions apply. Void where prohibited. See DraftKings.com for details. So, fellas, not a big number here. Are you surprised that at least some of the Big 12 is interested in this? Maybe just a basketball move? Because even with a relatively soft schedule due to their conference, like, not a lot of confidence they're hitting the over here.
This is a basketball move. This is not a football move by any stretch of the imagination. Football couldn't go until, I think, 2031. The rest of the sports, I believe there's a 27-month until their time runs out of where they are now, or unless they can get out early. So, and then it has to be voted on with the majority of the 16 Big 12 teams, not the 12 Big 12 teams, but 16 Big 12 teams. But make no mistake, this is about basketball. Football, they play an independent schedule with teams like Merrimack, FAU, Georgia State, UMass. And so I still think it'll be under. I don't think it's a very good football program. They're trying to rebuild. They're trying to reorg that thing and get it going again. But I don't know if they will, and B, how long it will take to get it done. This is a basketball move because Big 12 basketball is really, really good.
Yeah, they won 3 games in football last year. Jim Mora is in year 3 now, where, hey, the first year, they got him bowl eligible. They were coming off that second go-around with Randy Edsall that aged like milk, and we thought might have something there. But it's difficult, Dad. The UConn that I knew growing up when we lived in Connecticut, where Dan Orlovsky, our buddy at ESPN, was helping those guys to great heights, was when they had the Big East tie-in, was in the old Big East, where you had a path to the New Year's 6 bowl games. You had all of these things that you could sell to recruits. And then when that went away and the first round of conference realignment happened back then, UConn was one of the programs that suffered immensely. Randy Edsall left that first time around and everything went to hell. So I do think it would be interesting to see. It might be too late in the game at this point, especially the way NIL and the portal have affected it now. It's a lot harder to do what UConn did back then, which was quite honestly recruit 3rd and 4th tier Florida guys. There was a ton of those guys that made their way up to Connecticut for that roster that did produce pros for a bit. But joining the Big 12, who will still have a foothold, at least for the time being, in the college football playoff, who knows what it'd be by the time football would join, would be interesting to see. But you're right, Dad. This is about UConn recognizing, hey, we've got a valuable commodity right now. As this thing continues to reorganize in college sports, and we're trying to navigate where this goes forward, we got the basketball program that is the envy of everyone right now on the men's and women's side. And so we need to take that and leverage that to the best of our ability now while it's still hot. Because as they saw this offseason with the Danny Hurley flirtation with the Los Angeles Lakers, that could certainly change. And while they've won championships across 3 different coaches in the 21st century, you still can't guarantee anything in this new world going forward. And so I understand them trying to make this move and say, hey, we're going to leverage the thing that we know we've got. We do basketball in Stores, Connecticut. Everything else we'll figure out along the way. I think that waiting period will probably get negotiated out quick because, Dad, if you're the Big 12, you're salivating the notion at getting UConn over here with Kansas and Baylor and a bunch of the other teams that have gone and been staples and been incredibly competitive, especially on the men's and women's side lately.
Yeah, normally it's football leading the way and all the other sports come along for the ride. This one, it's basketball leading the way without question. And you need a super majority, so it would take 12 yes votes out of the 16 teams to approve this move. So we'll see. It's not on the table yet. There's no formal vote just yet because there is the waiting period for the rest of the sports of 27 months. Again, football I don't think would be till 31. But this is clearly about basketball and would absolutely make the Big 12 a bigger and better conference basketball wise.
I do love that you need the super majority because the Big 12 has 16 teams, much like the Big 10 has 18 teams right now. And the SEC, apparently one of the few leagues to have the foresight on the big time Power 4 level to just name their conference and not tie it to numbers, because as we've seen, those numbers were clearly drawn in pencil and not in pen as this thing moves around. Jesse, one of the other big changes potentially coming up in college football is we're still learning the transfer portal era, NIL. Apparently the powers that be trying to go back on that spring transfer league or spring transfer window and see if they can shut that down.
Yeah, it's officially in danger of being eliminated. The NCAA's FBS and FCS Oversight Committee recommended the sport move to a single offseason notification of transfer window. So guys, what do you think of this? I think the point of it would be to provide more roster stability. Obviously, there would be other opportunities. There's that, time after a coach leaves. There's a couple other opportunities after playoffs. Teams would have a window as well. So how do we feel about this proposal?
Yeah, Dad, for anyone unfamiliar, since we've started trying to whittle down the transfers in college football to more confined spaces, to Jesse's point, to help these coaches out who are trying to build rosters, you had the 30-day window in December after we got done with the conference championships heading into bowl season that we've seen affect the players available for bowl season, change a lot of that. And then there's also been the 30-day window after in April around spring football where plenty of guys have jumped in after. And Dad, I understand, and I always have said, I am somewhat sympathetic towards the coaches that are trying to build a roster in the confines of this new sport. But we see with some of the court settlements and now this, there is, I think, a correction coming in terms of what the power people in college sports want to do in terms of paying players and allowing them freedom of movement. I'm always going to bristle a bit at removing rights from a group that has just recently gotten them at the level that college players have. I do think the ripple effect of this will be, and this is why it's going to be so fascinating as we watch this year, the case study of what the 12-team playoff does for players that are thinking about transferring. To Jesse's point, they're going to have an opportunity after the CFP, should their team participate, to still enter their name in and be a part of that. But for everyone else, do we see even more transfers then in that fall window instead of a kid saying, hey, I'm going to wait around and see how the spring shakes out. I'm going to stick around here. If you've got to make that decision to jump or not, everyone's going to be taking much more serious stock of that situation in December and potentially making that move even faster, which maybe coaches are fine with that because they just want the clarity going into spring football.
I think coaches would be fine with it because they want the clarity. They don't want to have to reshuffle their rosters in spring. And basically for the 12-team playoffs and the FCS playoffs, players will get 5 days, the 5-day exemption from when their particular season ends. Since the playoff goes different rounds, it's when you lose and your season is over, you get 5 days. It's still of note, will they get the 30 days if there's a coaching change? No matter when there's a coaching change, you get a 30-day window to transfer. Will it stay a 30-day window? Will they get a 30-day window? What kind of window will they get? Because they should get a window if there's a coaching change. And most of the time, coaching changes are going to come in December for teams that aren't in the playoffs, or January. You want to make a coaching change as quick as you can just for the continuity of the team. But players should have a window, and I believe will have a window if there's a coaching change as well.
They freaking better. The one thing we've learned is you'll get your ass sued if you're everyone else. And I understand the NCAA is trying to work all these things into the court settlements to make sure that they can't get sued for antitrust stuff anymore. And that's always nerved me out a bit because these are not people that want to do this for players out of the goodness of their heart. They're doing it because they got the gun held to their head in court and were told they had to go and let players start to actually exercise rights. So when all this stuff happens, I get a little bit nerved out. I hope it's not that dire. Like you said, it should still be. And we've saw how late this year. Kalen DeBoer hired January 11th. Jed Fish hired a couple of days after that. Chip Kelly left UCLA on February 8th to go be an offensive coordinator. Like, those are your lives if you're the players. I understand people worry to some extent because this is a new problem, in quotes, for coaches in terms of roster building. But for players, it's the same old thing. If you come to play for one guy and the scheme and the things that he affords you, and then all of a sudden he waves bye-bye, your life just changed, and you've got to have the ability to change that up. We're going to change things up in hour number 2. Coming up next, talking more college football with On3's Andy Staples here on GoJo and Golic. Welcome back to GoJo and Golic. Hour number 2 here. Andy Staples from On3, great college football analyst, going to join us here in a couple of minutes after he finishes up his show, the Andy Staples Show, that you guys can always check out. On3 with Andy Staples. We'll check that out in a couple of minutes. He's going to join us. Obviously, Florida Gator alum, looking ahead to that game against Miami this weekend that he has dubbed the Pitchforks and Torches game because either fan base, Dad, that loses in that one. And I remember this was Miami and Texas A&M played, I think, a couple of years ago or a year before, and it had that same tenor where anyone who loses this game is going to freak out and lose their mind. So plenty to get into with that with him. But, Dad, you and I were talking during this last break and realized we got college football that starts up tomorrow night that involves some serious contenders. Now, the matchups on paper aren't going to be anything to write home about. You're going to get ranked teams like NC State playing Western Carolina. You're going to see Missouri playing Murray State. Kansas is going to play Lindenwood. Minnesota and North Carolina, a decent Power 4 on Power 4 matchup for us to sink our teeth into. And, of course, the Sports Talk Industrial Complex's very own Colorado Buffaloes hosting the North Dakota State Bison, which is going to be a fascinating start to their 2024 season, Dad. So there's lots of interesting coming up tomorrow night on your college football screen.
Oh, and here we go again with where will Colorado be? They came out of the gates just smoking, and every celeb in the world wanted to be on the sidelines. And the locker room was like a who's who of celebs going through, jumping on the bandwagon. And then obviously their season went kaput. And here they go again with a bunch of new transfers, but some of the same names, the Sanders kids and Travis Hunter, and a rebuilt offensive line to see what they can do against a North Dakota State team that's going to be a really tough out. There is no doubt about that. And so we rev up the sound machine on Deion Sanders in Colorado again. Deion just already in the news, and Colorado for not taking the questions of a reporter who has written some bad things about Deion. They've been in the spotlight for more wrong reasons than right reasons this time around.
And we remember last year, burst onto the scene because they played TCU, who was coming off a national championship appearance and did not have really any semblance of that roster walking into that season, but had the reputation. And so Colorado was able to go draft off that reputation, get an earlier season win at a time where we didn't know what to expect with Deion and that program, and it launched the entire conversation. Now, Dad, you're right. They've got not only a reputation on the field of going through that with talented skill players, but getting bullied inside last year on the field, but they've got the reputation off the field now of sort of creating an interesting culture. There's been plenty written and said about them in both positive and negative ways. You had the story the other day with Deion Sanders help opening up savings accounts for players who had kids on that team or had children on the way in an act there to try and help those young men set up for the future, but we've also seen the butting of heads with the media. And now, I mean, this North Dakota State team, this is also an interesting one of expectation versus reality. Because if this had been 4 years ago, Dad, and you had told me Colorado at this juncture of its life cycle was getting ready to play North Dakota State at the FCS level, I'd have told you I was very worried about Colorado because that Bison team had been the face of FCS football for a long time and still is one of the faces there. The Fargo Dome, one of my favorite places I've ever gotten to call a game. And the play and the style of play they had, downhill, smash mouth, in-your-face football, the antithesis of what you're seeing in Colorado. Now all of a sudden a little bit different. Matt Entz, their head coach from last year's, the linebacker coach at USC, that had been a team that had seen South Dakota State, their rivals, all of a sudden coming up and becoming a big-time power at the FCS level. So I'll be curious as well. I haven't looked into this version of North Dakota State a ton heading into this season, but as a program and identity, they do represent a lot of things that on paper would give Colorado trouble before they see some physical teams at the FBS level like Nebraska coming up soon.
Yeah, they're that downhill team. Remember, Colorado has a new D-line coach, one Hall of Famer named Warren Sapp, who's trying to transform that D-line into not only getting after the passer, as he said, like a bunch of crazed dogs, but also they're going to have to stop the run as well. So Warren said that whole Colorado team, but Warren Sapp, his unit, going to get a big test in week 1.
There's no doubt about it. So that one exciting to take a look at again there, Dad, as well. And like I said, we're going to get to see Utah play that night as well, Missouri, Kansas. So some of the teams, Utah expected to win the Big 12. You get your first look against them in a warm-up game starting on Thursday night. So we didn't have to wait long. We had the Week 0 warm-up in college football, the soft launch, the friends and family version of the sport that I have actually come to love a lot. I know some people feel a little bit differently about it, or it's a little bit controversial at times, having it be a Week 0 and not full-blown Week 1. But I've come to enjoy it. But Week 1 now starting in earnest as we prepare for the big-time action in the sport to all of a sudden come home to roost. For more on that, delighted now, as Dad, I think, had a little bit of blinders on for us here, forgetting there's other games coming up this weekend. Because you and I obviously focused on Notre Dame's matchup with Texas A&M down at Kyle Field. It's big for Notre Dame, the future of that program, Marcus Freeman, year 3. It is not the only big game coming up this weekend. Miami and Florida starting off the season. An in-state, I guess you can call it a rivalry. I don't know if there's much teeth to that. We can certainly ask our friend Andy Staples, who's kind enough to join us now on Three's very own great college football analyst at Andy_Staples on Twitter. Andy, how much do you consider that a rivalry as a proud Gator alum here with the folks down at the U?
I don't think the Florida people consider it a rivalry as much as the Miami people do. And it's interesting because it's Florida that bailed on the annual rivalry in the 80s during the Galen Hall era when Miami was just ridiculously good. And Florida's like, should we really be playing these guys in Florida State every year out of conference? But I do think it should be an annual game. I think it's a fun rivalry. And like you think about Billy Napier and Mario Cristobal got hired within 8 days of one another, kind of promising the same things. And they've been circling around each other. They've been compared to one another basically since they've been hired, and now this is their first chance to finally play each other.
So interesting to see that you've dubbed this the pitchforks and torches game here. So I know it's only Week 1. With that in mind, though, their first crack at each other, how much is already at stake in this matchup actually?
Well, the losing coach is going to be in a world of hurt. Now, it only may be for a couple of weeks that they're in a world of hurt, but it's going to be awful because basically both these fan bases have convinced themselves that their program is superior, and it will be the shortcomings of the other team's coach that allows their team to win. And so if Billy Napier out-schemes Mario Cristobal or Mario Cristobal out-schemes Billy Napier, the guy that loses is going to be like, oh my God, if we can't beat that guy, what are we going to do? And that's what the attitude is with these guys. And, both of them have not quite delivered on the promise that they made when they got the job. I think there's varying levels. I think probably Napier's been more of a disappointment than Cristobal has, but neither one has gotten that program to where it's supposed to be. I think the Miami folks feel a little bit better about where their roster is right now, but that's one of those things that if that roster goes into the swamp and gets its clock cleaned, they're not going to feel good anymore. So it's going to be just volcanic, the reaction against the losing coach here.
Does Miami feel, I guess they got a little boost with Florida State losing to Georgia Tech last week? I know they're going to play later in the season. They're going to play Florida State, but a little bit of already, the favorite Florida State already dropped one in the conference.
Well, if you listen to them talk, they were going to beat Florida State anyway, and they weren't worried about that. Now, Mario Cristobal is 0-2 against Mike Norvell, so we got to see it to believe it. It's just sort of like Billy Napier's 0-2 against Mark Stoops in Kentucky. Like, got to see it to believe it. But I feel like the Miami folks think this is the year that they've now built a roster that is competitive, that can win the ACC, that can make the college football playoff, and they're probably not wrong. This has been a mix. It's the headlines are the guys they got out of the transfer portal, the quarterback Cam Ward, the running back Damian Martinez, but you have to remember they've recruited pretty well along the line of scrimmage since Mario Cristobal has been there. And I think that's the part that you've got to do. That's the hardest part to do. And they got a monster last year in Reuben Bain coming off the edge. Francis Maui-Noah started as a true freshman at tackle, and they feel like he's going to be a star. So they've done the things you're supposed to do off the field. Now the game management on field, going to halftime with fewer than 3 timeouts, part of it has to commence.
Yeah, the Georgia Tech loss sitting firmly in everyone's craw on that side last year. You mentioned Cam Ward, though. I do want to sit on that. For people that maybe didn't watch Washington State last season, who are now seeing all the hope here, they just watched a transfer quarterback in DJ Uiagalelei as a part of a really disappointing performance with Florida State here. How much different is both the expectation for Cam Ward and the ceiling that he has as a player coming over here now to Miami?
The expectation is higher. Cam Ward was the sort of the prize among the quarterbacks in the transfer portal. Now, I was not completely convinced that he's a program changer. I mean, you watch him at Washington State, it was pretty hit or miss. You know, there were games where he was great, but there are also games where he's throwing it to the other team. I don't know that he's the savior there. And if you look, you know, basically Miami averaged the same yards per attempt through the air last year that Cam Ward averaged at Washington State. Now, perhaps putting Cam Ward with better players will make that offense more explosive. But if you're 7.7 yards per attempt again, you're going to be the same offense. So they better hope that it's the better players around him that elevate his level of play.
General picture in college football, Ohio State has the $20 million bag of NIL money. You had the wide receiver coach at Colorado who is no longer there, was seeking Saudi money. Where are we in the money arms race in how big it can get?
Well, it's going to change if the House versus the NCAA settlement gets approved in the federal court system, which not a guarantee, but the schools are going to start paying next year if that goes through. So the schools will have up to $22 million that they can pay. That's across all sports. We're assuming most of that goes to football, and then that gets supplemented by collectives. And the idea for the schools is that this will be the salary cap. It won't, because that would also violate the Sherman Act, and they get dragged back into court if they want to try that. So the collectives will supplement. And how big can it get? As big as the market will bear. You know, everybody keeps talking about how much money this is. Guys, you pay $14 million for a decent safety in the NFL for 1 year of him. Like, to get a whole team for $20 million is actually a pretty good deal when you have this level of interest and this level of money rolling in.
And certainly, I think you're right, and it just feels this way because we know it's new in college football. And for most people, the general fan, the notion of this much money in the sport has always been a little bit foreign. What's interesting to me about seeing the Ohio State price tag now, because that's clearly become part of the messaging here. Ross Bajort and company have not hid that is exactly what they've poured into this roster. And yet, Andy, we talk so much about that, and I still look up, and Georgia's the favorite in most sports books, including ours here at DraftKings Sportsbook. So when we look at this Georgia team, why are they favored still over what is looked at by most people as one of the most talented Ohio State rosters we've ever seen?
I picked Ohio State #1, so I might be the wrong person to ask on this. But the reason is Georgia has a history of recruiting and developing the best players along the line of scrimmage. Georgia's got a veteran quarterback in Carson Beck. They have a multitude of weapons. Now, we don't know exactly how they're going to deploy them. We don't know how, because you don't really replace Brock Bowers. Brock Bowers is a very special talent. And then you've also got Ladd McConkey, who is a second-round receiver as well. So how do you deploy the weapons you have, which, you know, Oscar Delp at tight end, Ben Urosic, the guy they got from Stanford, who Stanford used him in a lot of ways that, like Georgia used Brock Bowers. But you've also got Dominic Lovett. You've got Colby Young, the big receiver that they took from Miami out of the transfer portal. You know, they have a lot of ways to beat you. The question is, what flavor is Carson Beck going to want to go with? Trevor Etienne, the tailback from Florida, Dylan Bell, kind of a Swiss Army knife that they've had, who can be a running back or receiver. So I think that's the part of it. Like, we know Georgia's defense is going to be good. We know their D-line is going to be nasty. Michael Williams is the guy that everybody's talking about as a top 10 pick next year. So it's just that they're always loaded, and they always have some younger players who might Wally Pipp an older player. I mean, you saw that last year. Like, Jamon Dumas-Johnson was a starting linebacker at Georgia last year, who is now starting at Kentucky because he got Wally Pipped.
Which new team to a conference can do the most damage in their new conference?
There's a couple in the Big 12. Arizona, Utah. I think Utah especially. You remember the last time Cam Rising was healthy, he led Utah to a second consecutive Pac-12 title. Utah still has the most old potential NFL players in the Big 12. Like that roster is old and is experienced and is talented. So they obviously should be able to come in and compete right away. Arizona's interesting because they got the quarterback in Noah Fafita and then Tedero McMillan, the wide receiver. And these two guys have been playing together since high school. He is an absolute freak. If he's not the best receiver in the country, he's one of the top 3 or so. And there's not really anybody else in the Big 12 like him.
So that obviously an experienced group in the Big 12 here, and an eye on the playoff because of that. A lot of people's pick to win the conference and thus make an expanded playoff. And Andy, we've talked certainly about the premium that is being one of the top 4 teams, getting that first round bye in a 12-team playoff. But I heard you on with the guys at Pardon My Take the other day, and you actually pointed out that you think the 5th seed could be the sweet spot here. So walk us through this.
So, yeah, if you lose the SEC or the Big Ten title game and you wind up number 5, then this is probably negligible because you've had to play like a Georgia or an Ohio State or an Oregon or an Alabama, and you've gotten beaten up for 60 minutes and you got to deal with all of that. But if you're Notre Dame and you wind up number 5 and you don't have to play in a conference championship game, or let's say you are, I don't know, Ole Miss or you are Penn State and you didn't make the conference championship game, and the committee somehow ranked the conference championship game loser below you, and you wind up number 5 without having to play that 13th game, well then, okay, the number 5 team plays the number 4 team. Or, well, they start playing the number 12 team. We'll start with that. Start playing the number 12 team. The number 12 team is probably not actually going to be ranked number 12. It's going to be some conference champ, most likely from the group of 5, that is ranked lower than 12, that gets pulled up to 12 because of an automatic bid. So you got that first game, and you're playing that game at home. Your quarterfinal game, which is in a bowl game, you play number 4. Now, number 4 is probably not the 4th ranked team in the College Football Playoff Selection Committee rankings. It is probably a conference champ, and the top 4 ranked conference champs get the top 4 seeds. So you could be playing number 14 in that game. Meanwhile, the number 1 seed has to play the winner of the 8-9 game, who might actually be 6-7 or might actually be 5-6. So that's the issue you got.
Is that something you think that the committee and the people that govern the sport would have to look at and potentially change, given what an advantage it could wind up being?
Yeah, I think they know they have to look at it. But the thing is, you had all these idiots for all these years who don't understand that all conferences are not created equal going, you got to value conference championships. And they're like, okay, you asked. Here you go. We're valuing conference championships now.
Music to my ears, Andy, as someone that has long warred against the concept of needing a conference, unsurprisingly, as a Notre Dame grad here. By the way, we got like a minute left in this, Andy. We've kind of beaten the Notre Dame-Texas A&M game into the ground here. How do you look at this one? Who do you actually think can win this?
Well, they both can win this. There's a reason the spread's as close as it is. How does Notre Dame's offensive line hold up? Obviously, look, they were going to have to replace Joe Alt and Blake Fisher anyway. The Charles Jagusah injury hurts, but let's be real. Charles Jagusah had only started the Sun Bowl last year. So it was going to be somebody going into Kyle Field with, if you play the video game, that stadium pulse just rocking and squiggly lines everywhere. So like you were going to have to deal with that anyway. And a Texas A&M defensive line that's going to be nasty. Nick Scorton, the Purdue transfer, led the Big Ten in sacks last year, comes home. He's from Bryan, Texas. Can they protect Riley Leonard? If they can, Riley Leonard should have more options to throw to than Sam Hartman did last year. Chris Mitchell, big transfer from FIU. Mitchell Evans is healthy now. Jaden Greathouse is healthy now. Faison not playing lacrosse anymore. Well, he will eventually, play some more lacrosse, but he's given you an option. So Notre Dame should have more options on offense as long as Riley Leonard is upright. And that's the key.
And that is the source of anxiety for all Notre Dame fans as they get ready to make that trip down to Kyle Field. Andy, you're the best, man. We appreciate the time as always, brother. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate it.
Thanks,
Again,
man.
check him out on Twitter at Andy_Staples. Andy Staples on 3, the show, the podcast, wherever you get him. Awesome stuff from him as always. And read him over there as well. And Dad, yeah, that stadium pulse living rent-free in a lot of guys' heads. And for Notre Dame fans, hopefully the thing that's not living rent-free in our quarterback's head come this weekend.
Welcome back to GoJo and Golic. Let's keep the college football talk going. Heisman odds on the board at DraftKings. Dillon Gabriel sitting as the favorite at plus 600. Carson Beck at plus 800. Both guys expecting big things for their teams as they push for the championship. Texas also has big expectations. Might get some grace in their first year in the SEC, but third-year QB Quinn Ewers might be feeling the heat perhaps here a little bit, especially with Arch Manning breathing down his back. A lot's been made of that. Who are the players, do you guys think, with the most to prove this season?
Yeah, Dad, it's an interesting question, especially if you frame it with some of the more known commodities. Now, there are certain players that I think automatically, transfer players specifically, a lot of the quarterbacks that we're seeing in guys like Dillon Gabriel. We just talked with Andy Staples about Cam Ward down at Miami. We saw what happened with DJ Uiagalelei in his first game with Florida State. Those guys do have something to prove because whatever resume you've had, you've obviously been brought over at a time where it's incredibly financially lucrative to be a transfer quarterback at this level of college football, but also with the thought that, hey, you're the missing piece in a roster that believes they can contend for a conference title and thus a CFP spot and a national championship. So I do think those guys sort of automatically fall into it, which makes me look at a guy, let's say like Quinn Ewers, who is at Texas still. Him and Steve Sarkisian have worked together now for plenty of time. Yeah, the Arch Manning factor, they kind of went through the weirds on that at the beginning, and now it's sort of settled into, hey, Quinn's one of the best quarterbacks in college football. I don't see this becoming an issue. You could maybe sell it because of the turnover of offensive weapons. But, Dad, I actually think Quinn Ewers, for maybe the first time in his Texas career, walks into a lot more comfortable situation, at least at the beginning of the season, than he's had.
I look at, the comfort there of him with the team, but the pressure, I look at three teams going into new conferences. Texas with Quinn Ewers going into the SEC, Dillon Gabriel going with to the Big Ten from Oregon, and Cam Rising. Cam Rising, seems like he's been in college forever, dealt with the injuries. His last year in 22 threw for almost 3,000 yards, 25 touchdowns, 7 interceptions, ran for another 6. And then didn't play last year, and now going into the Big 12. And now, whenever we talk about team into the new conference with the best chance, it's usually been an Oregon or maybe even a Texas. But in reality, we all think it's Utah. You can throw Arizona in there as well, but we think it's Utah, and that would have to be led by Cam Rising. So while he's older, been in college for a while, I think there's a lot of pressure on him to regain what he has had to lead his team to the Pac-12 title a couple of times. So I do think there is definitely pressure on him.
There's pressure, but I guess if we're framing this as most to prove right now, I don't feel like Cam Rising has a ton that he's got to prove to us. We know who Cam Rising can be. The thing he has to prove is he healthy? But in terms of what he's got to prove as a player and is important to this team, I do think that's pretty well established at this point. If you look at Avery Johnson at Kansas State, that's one that's a lot more interesting to me. He's one of the biggest recruits in the history of that school. He came on and had an electric bowl game. He's got some dual threat capability. That's a guy that I look at for Kansas State who is expected to contend at the level that Utah is in the Big 12, and say that's a player that I need to see this year now with the reins fully turned over. Will Howard off there at Ohio State getting ready to play with all their fun toys in that offense. Can Avery Johnson come in and be the guy right away for Kansas State?
Yeah, I mean, how about Cade Klubnik with Clemson? Dabo wanting him to run more, use his legs more. Didn't do that much last year. I don't know how well he's going to do, but certainly the expectations of Clemson being led by defense and then can the offense come along for the ride would put pressure on a quarterback.
It absolutely would. And Cade Klubnik is sort of fascinating to me for that reason, because I think you're right, Dad. He's a guy that was a big-time recruit, the one that pushed DJ Uiagalelei out of Clemson. They wanted to get him on the field, came on early on and had those good showings at the end of his first season there before he became the full-time starter last year. And then once he became the full-time starter, funny thing happened. We didn't get the immediate dividends that I think we've become used to with Clemson quarterbacks. When we talk about going all the way back to Taj Boyd, going from him to Deshaun Watson and Trevor Lawrence with a couple of detours in between, but in general, you've always had blue chip production at that position at Clemson. And now this idea that Dabo, who is always trying to tout this place as a developmental program, and it is, they do develop talent very well. It's why they've been so stubborn about the portal. You got a chance to kind of do that at quarterback in a way that hasn't necessarily had to happen. And it's year 2 with Garrett Riley in that offense. Obviously, some familiar faces are gone. Bo Collins plays for Notre Dame now. Your best running back from last year is in the NFL playing in Philadelphia. So there's a bunch of differences, but you do have a rarity, it seems like, in college football, a quarterback with the same coordinator on the same team with a chance to actually grow year to year with a group that Clemson offensively probably never is going to be what they were in the before times again, or at least not right now, but they've got the defense that can help certainly give you plenty of opportunities because that still looks like it's going to be a top 5 unit.
And how about Cam Ward? I mean, it was at Washington State. They were never going to win the Pac-12. His 2 years there, he threw for 48 touchdowns and 15 interceptions. But now their expectation is for Miami to be in the hunt for the ACC conference. So while he has proved his play is extremely good, now it's about leading a team as one of, along with Florida State and Clemson, and I guess you could throw Virginia Tech in there, Miami having a really good shot at winning a conference and him leading the way.
Yeah, he's another one. Cam Ward's career has been fascinating overall. And you're right, he walks into a situation where now there are going to be so many eyes on him and Mario Cristobal at the helm of that Miami program. I want to give one more, though, and shout out to the guys over at Split Zone Duo doing an awesome job. I was listening to their Big Ten preview, and they brought up an interesting thing we haven't talked a ton about. Publicly, Ohio State has gotten a lot of the conversation. A ton of the pressure talk that we've had has been on Penn State as the team that has not accomplished to the level requisite with their talent and their peers in the Big Ten. Alex Orji, the quarterback, or the incumbent quarterback we expect to play at Michigan this season, replacing J.J. McCarthy, who, Jim Harbaugh called the best quarterback in program history based on what he accomplished for them, helping them get over that national championship hump. Because remember, Dad, Michigan under Jim Harbaugh, the guy who was supposed to be the quarterback whisperer, it had been anything but. You had gone through the Joe Milton flirtation during the 2020 season where things went haywire, where he was supposed to be the quarterback of the future, and then all of a sudden, it didn't necessarily pan out that way. You went from there. Cade McNamara didn't look good. J.J. McCarthy was getting some time and then took over full-time and made that ascension and was never still expected to do everything for that team. They had the offensive line as a meat shield. They had Blake Corum in the backfield, who was a Heisman Trophy candidate. And of course, the defense. Defense still going to be there, but offensively, Dad, tons of new parts up front, tons of new weapons on the outside for this team, outside of Colston Loveland at tight end, who's expected to be a great player. Donovan Edwards was really not that great last season until the postseason. Alex Orji steps into a really tough spot at a point in time where his success is largely going to determine what this Michigan offense's outcome looks like. Sharon Moore's still going to beat it up front, but I do think this is a quarterback that comes into a very interesting seat at this program because of the guy who just left and because of everything else hanging in the background for him.
Yeah, but how much can you? Dude's thrown one pass in 22. That's it. I mean, that's his entire career. So, I mean, while I get it's the pressure of being a Michigan quarterback coming off a national championship, I mean, how much can you literally expect from him?
I know. I'm saying I don't know what it is, but in terms of most to prove for Michigan, part of this is, hey, when you brought Sharon Moore on as the head coach and promoted him from offensive coordinator, where he's also been the offensive line coach, it was the understanding that, hey, you wanted to keep things and you wanted to keep that continuity. You understood what could be coming down the pipeline here. But for Michigan as a program, we just saw Florida State fall flat on their face week 1, coming off of a robust season where they felt like they had a lot to prove and had done that. For Michigan, you just won the title. Can you stick around? Can you replace and replenish in the way that a lot of your peers in Georgia and Ohio State and others have over the years? That is the interesting challenge that's ahead of them right now. Difficult for a lot of reasons, but Alex Orji, a player in a fascinating position walking into the 2024 season that we're going to get our first look at coming up here very, very soon. But coming up next, we're going to give you your first look at something new coming up around here that actually for us is something old coming back into our lives. We'll explain next here on GoJo and Golic. Welcome back to GoJo and Golic, and happy anniversary in order around here. It is the 1-year anniversary of this show launching and officially becoming part of the DraftKings network. Obviously, Dad had been doing Golic and Smetty for the year prior to that. I had been doing GoJo, me and Brandon Newman, who's still our great producer on the show. But 1 year of our show feels like a good time to celebrate, but also help welcome in another show here on the DraftKings network. We know we've got this full great lineup of programming here, but starting this fall at 6 p.m. Eastern on Monday and Thursday nights, you're going to get more football in your world. The pregame power-up is going to be coming to your screens right here on the DraftKings network. Hosted by none other than our old friend and the former co-host of Golic and Wingo, TREY WINGO, joining us here at DraftKings now.
Hey.
Brother man, welcome aboard. How you doing?
I know you guys. Nice to meet you both. How are you?
Wow. It's you never know the craziest paths how they travel, do you?
It's unbelievable, and that's very interesting. Today was the 1-year anniversary of this show, and we're announcing the other thing here. So it's great to see you guys. It's great to see you guys kicking so much butt and doing so much fun, and I'm happy to be a part of it and can't wait to get started, man. It's going to be a lot of fun Monday and Thursday nights.
It's amazing, you know, our show, Golic and Wingo, ended in 21, and it's amazing in the 3 years since how much grayer you and I have gotten, Trey.
Yeah, you know what? At this point, just let it wash over me, baby.
That's it.
I do not care. I'm just glad to still be kicking and still be doing stuff. And it just feels kind of right to be back here sitting with you guys and talking some football.
And we're going to be with you in person in Kansas City
Absolutely.
next week for the kickoff leading into game 1 of the NFL season, which, Trey, and I know you're excited about this. I mean, God, a longtime veteran of ESPN's NFL coverage, the NFL draft, and so many things. You've been around this sport in particular at this level for such a long time. So what are you excited about with this new show? What should we all expect as we get going for the start of this NFL season with you guys?
Yeah, it's going to be great, and I can't wait to be in Kansas City with you guys. That's going to be a lot of fun. Look, we're just going to break down games every way we possibly can with the betting odds. Claudia Bellafato is going to be with us for that. Emerson Lotzi is going to be on the road with us a lot this week, every week. Stormy's going to be with us as well. And then we're just going to talk football the way we normally do. We're going to break down the games Monday and Thursday nights, see what happened and transpired over Sunday and the things that happened to do it and how it might affect the matchups going forward. So it's basically just going to be a really fast-paced, fun hour of football, getting you set for the primetime games. And, of course, we'll be there all season long, starting, as you said, in Kansas City. And we're going to be in New Orleans all week long for the Super Bowl, too. So it's going to be great. I really am jazzed and looking forward to it.
Yeah, something new for you hosting a football show that you've already been doing for decades. So
We'll see if it works out,
should be a nice, smooth transition.
I'm stuck in a rut.
So let's quickly talk about next Thursday. As Mike mentioned, we'll all be doing a show in Kansas City for Kansas City and Baltimore. Last year we were there for Kansas City and their 1-point loss to Detroit. So how do you see the season starting out this year for Kansas City?
Well, listen, you know, and I know, and we all know how I felt about Patrick Mahomes for a long time, right? So I cannot imagine a situation where they're going to lose this home opener to start the season in back-to-back years. And remember, it was a catch right here in the hands of the now released Kadarius Toney that led to a pick six, which was the difference in that 1-point loss last year in the home opener the Chiefs had against the Lions. Toney has been released, and really a shame because the guy had talent. He just couldn't get out of his own way. I just can't imagine a scenario in which they're going to lose that game 2 years in a row.
Trey, we talked a lot more about the Kansas City defense last year than we ever had during Patrick Mahomes' time under center. And we heard Mahomes talk about how it was frustrating at times the way the offense ended up shaking out last year, and they made the best of it. When you see the new weapons, certainly Hollywood Brown's been banged up, but Xavier Worthy, their top pick out of Texas. Do you think this offense can start to regain some of the form that we saw early in Mahomes' career?
Absolutely. You know, as you guys know, a preseason game is like a regular season game in the same way a tofu burger and a Wagyu burger are both burgers. They couldn't be more different, right? I mean, technically they're both the same sandwich, but they're very, very different. But what I've noticed in the preseason games with Kansas City is they are clearly taking more shot plays with the speed they had with Hollywood before he went down, with Xavier Worthy, and now they get Juju back underneath, and we'll see what he has left. And Rashee Rice is also there, and he was such a good complementary receiver. You know, last year the yards per attempt for Patrick Mahomes was the lowest of his career, and the receiving corps led the league in drops, and they still won their second straight Super Bowl. I think this team going into this season for Kansas City might just be the best overall team Mahomes has ever had around him. We know the defense is much better last year and getting into this season than it was in their first couple of Super Bowls, where they just were trying to, you know, stem the tide enough, make one or two stops to sort of give the Chiefs an opportunity. Well, now that Chiefs defense can go out there and make plenty of stops and make plenty of turnovers. And yes, they lost L'Jarius Sneed, but they have a lot of faith in those young cornerbacks and defensive backs they took in that 2022 draft, whether it's Williams, Watson, Cook. They're going to get some of those guys back from injury. Trent McDuffie is a first-team All-Pro. And they have a bunch of pass rushers. You know, Chris Jones, Amenahu's coming back from the torn ACL. I think that Kansas City defense is going to be stout, and I think that offense is going to look similar to the offenses of 2019, 2020, and 21 this year in Kansas City with the shot plays they're going to take.
Couple of surprise teams you think this year that'll make a bit of a jump?
Well, you know, every year we seem to have that one team that goes from worst to first in the division, right? And you look at the Bengals finishing 9-8 last year, and they were last place in the AFC North. They get Joe Burrow back. I'm a little concerned about Cincinnati because I was talking to somebody this summer. You know, the whole the Higgins thing never really got resolved, and they still haven't paid Jamar Chase. And someone said to me, the vibe just isn't right there. So I don't know what's going to happen. We'll see how it plays out. But something there isn't much in the same way, like, guys, we talked about it. It seemed like every year there was something wrong with Stephon Diggs and the Bills. There was just something that wasn't quite clicking. It kind of has a little bit of that sense right now with the way they're dealing with this Jamar Chase thing. We'll see how that plays out. I'll tell you one team I really like that no one's talking about, and I agree it's dependent on a rookie quarterback, but I'm curious to see what Washington does. You know, they've got weapons. It will depend on Jaden Daniels and how quickly he develops, but Dan Quinn's going to have that defense back to where it was a couple of years ago. They got a bunch of new defensive players, and the NFC East is really interesting. Historically, the Cowboys are out because they won it last year. No teams repeated in that division. Mike, you almost were playing the last time someone repeated in that division. It was the Eagles 4 years in a row in the late 90s, early 2000s. So let's move the Cowboys out. The Giants, I think, are going to be terrible. And, you know, the whole thing with the Eagles, which is really interesting, when Jalen Hurts was asked about that situation with Nick Sirianni, he goes, why are we talking about this? It's old news, which was him basically saying, yeah, it was a problem, but I don't want to talk about it anymore. So I'm really interested to see what Washington can do. I think they're going to be much better defensively, and they have weapons on offense. So if Jaden comes along, they might be a team that really surprises a lot of people.
They are going to be fascinating in a division that is never short on consternation and anxiety. The NFC East does it well. Probably three coaches in there you could legitimately sell as at least hot seat tangent, if not fully in flames. All going to be looking at that. Can Jaden Daniels survive the Cliff Kingsbury late season lull that usually plagued him in Arizona? It's going to be fascinating to watch. Not nearly as fascinating as the pregame power-up, though. Again, 6 p.m. Eastern, Monday and Thursday, with our buddy Trey Wingo and a host of the great talent here at the DraftKings Network going to be out with us in Kansas City. Trey, man, can't wait to see you. We'll crack a beer open in KC, and we'll relive the old times, man.
I like this plan. I am very excited about this plan.
Awesome stuff. Thanks, Trey. We appreciate it, man. Looking forward to the show starting. Congratulations. Excited to have you on the team, brother.
All right, guys. So glad to be back with you guys. Seriously, it's going to be a blast.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it. Look forward to seeing you next week. That is so wild. That is so wild. We did a show together for 3 years after I finished with Greeny, and then we all went our separate ways. You and I obviously hooked up again, but now Trey back with us. As I said, both he and I a little grayer, but still with more wisdom to impart on others.
Certainly, the gray beard's going to stand out here on the DraftKings Network, but plenty still in the bag for both of you guys there. Coming up next, though, let's go from a happy reunited Trey Wingo to one angry Dolphin raising hell. Next on GoJo and Golic. Welcome back to GoJo and Golic. Let's finish up the way we always do. This, that, and the third. 3 quick stories to send you into the rest of the day. Make sure you download, subscribe, rate, review the show. Leave us a 5-star rating and check us out here live Monday through Friday from 8 to 10 a.m. Eastern on the DraftKings Network, as well as our YouTube channel, Samsung TV Plus, Roku, Xumo Play, all that fun stuff. If you miss any of our great guests as well, thank you to Kelsey Conway from the Cincinnati Enquirer for stopping by with the latest on Jamar Chase, Andy Staples from On3 looking ahead to Miami and Florida, as well as the rest of the Week 1 college football slate, and our very own TREY WINGO stopping by to help us get started and get ready for the new show debuting on DraftKings coming up this fall, the pregame power-up, 6 p.m. Eastern, Monday and Thursday every week, leading into the NFL action. You can catch those interviews in their entirety here, wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on YouTube right when we get done here. But guys, it is time for This, That, and the Third, which is brought to you by our friends at Knockaround. Knockaround sunglasses are phenomenal. They've been a day one partner with us on the show. I have got the Team USA soccer sunglasses right here. Had a lot of U.S. pride that the Knockaround folks supplied during the Olympic Games over in Paris, so that was fun. If you want to get like us, get great pairs of sunglasses that aren't going to break the bank, head to knockaround.com and use code GoJo Golic to pick up your new pair of polarized sunglasses here. And someone who could use a good pair of polarized sunglasses out at the racetrack, Dad, now Travis Kelce. It was announced yesterday, as we get to this, that Travis Kelce is going to become the owner of a racehorse named Swift Delivery. Unsurprisingly, Taylor Swift puns were at a premium here. I, for one, Dad, am just thankful to our friend and new ESPN Monday Countdown, Jason Kelce, who took to Twitter to do what we all needed him to do and ask the question, hey, does it have an enlarged heart? Can this horse do it with a broken heart? So he gets it. We should get it. Cool moment here. Dad, have you ever wanted to own a horse?
No. I have, no. I never really, I've never, I like horse racing. I don't love it. I don't know much about it. That's why we always bring on guests when we get to the Triple Crown races. So no, that's never I'd rather be part owner of like a race car. That's what I would like to be part owner of.
Well, it's interesting to note that this is a 3-year-old horse. It was named well before Travis Kelce became involved with Taylor Swift. So is this just a coincidence, or was he like, let me find a horse that can have a name that pays tribute to my girlfriend?
Jesse, you know with Taylor Swift, there are no accidents. This is all the mastermind behavior of a woman very in control of her life and her man. So I am, Dad, I would say there is no accident here.
Wait, so this horse was named before this relationship.
Yes.
So we don't know if the horse was actually Swift Delivery. May not have anything to do with it. I
don't think it does.
It has anything to do with Taylor Swift.
I think everything has something to do with Taylor Swift if you squint hard enough. And I would imagine as Travis was looking to buy into a horse, it probably stuck out for all the obvious reasons, and he decided to go and pull the trigger on this. So I don't see why you guys are trying to complicate this. He drew the line there, the invisible string, if you will, tying him to that horse, and managed to go and get this done. I'm happy for him. Maybe we'll see him he seems like a guy that would enjoy the Kentucky Derby, Dad. Him and Jason both from Cincinnati, or from the Heights in Ohio, not too far from Kentucky there. I'm sure they've had a good time at the Derby.
Yeah, they're from Cleveland Heights. Yeah, I think he has been. I'm not positive, but yeah, he would definitely enjoy being at the Kentucky Derby or at one of the big horse races. So, hey, listen. Congrats to him. Who knows what kind of a horse it is? I don't know. He bought it for the name. I'm sure not the ability. So we'll see.
Jason Kelce, national treasure. That's all I have to say. Jesse, let's go from Chiefs to a Dolphin here for that.
Yeah, is this the Dolphins' year? And I'm not talking about football. I'm just talking about Dolphins, the animal. So apparently in Japan, dolphins have bitten over 18 beachgoers this year. That is a huge increase from prior years. And experts are saying they think this could be the work of one lone rogue dolphin who is perhaps just playful, is just trying to play with people, but it's playing a little rough with the humans. Most of the bites were minor. One child had to get 20 to 30 stitches. That is rough. But guys, giving new meaning to the Darius lyrics, I'm such a baby, the dolphins make me cry, because this is a real dolphin making people cry.
Yeah, Dad, this isn't quite the killer whales going rogue and sinking super yachts off the coast. And we know killer whales not to be trifled with. Dolphins, we usually think of the big smile, the fact that they have sex with pleasure. They're as a generally joyful presence in the ocean. And so, yeah, I think these are just sort of like playful nibs that unfortunately can go too far every once in a while that we see time and time again. But one dolphin being this active is such an impressive testament. I think the Dolphins need to at least bring him in for a try.
Are you trying to say this is one horny dolphin? Is that what you're saying, Gojo? You're suggesting
we may. Listen, I feel like all dolphins are baseline horny, and I'm not here to kink shame them or anything, or say that that's something that they should be ashamed of. I'm just saying this could be one, very extra horny dolphin.
Okay.
Now, what do you do with the dolphin? Because if they feel it's playing, I mean, how do you keep it away? You don't want to kill the dolphin. I mean, my gosh, no. I mean, no, not by any stretch of the imagination. But if it's being harmful to some swimmers, I mean, what's the solution?
Get out of the dolphin's house.
I was going to say, you're walking into dolphin territory. You do not know swimming then. Have a healthy respect for the ocean. The dolphin has told you no, or at the very least, hey, if you're coming in here, we're going to have a little bit of fun, but it's fun on my terms. It's fun on the ocean's terms. Those aren't for us to decide.
I agree. I absolutely agree. We're in their house. Mm-hmm. They're not in our house. We're in their that's just like sharks. I don't go into the shark's house, because something very bad may happen. Now, if I go into a dolphin's house, I may get nibbled a little bit. Maybe I'll like it. Maybe I won't.
Hey, you know what? Who's to say we're not going to knock it till we No bad ideas around here. Although, again, that's probably a bad idea. People, don't get any ideas. Don't make this weird. I ask you. I beg you, please. But, yeah, much like bird law was a thing on Always Sunny, dolphin law and the ocean law are not something I'm going to mess with in the animal kingdom. And so if the dolphins tell you to get out, you get out. Jesse, let's get to the third, though, in a narrative universe we can all be comfortable in and is rapidly expanding.
Yeah, one of the internet's favorite things about college football is the multiverses that have spawned from commercials. You got like Dr. Pepper's Fansville, Nissan's Heisman House, and Reggie Bush is back with a little teaser for the season. A little ad campaign here where, we scroll through, we see, oh, look at him straightening his portrait on the wall. Back where he belongs, baby. This is kind of exciting, right? A little teaser for what's to come.
Huge and richly deserved, Dad. Like, thank God. We've been beating the drum around here and on various shows we've been on for a while that Reggie Bush's Heisman never should have been taken away from him. Never. But certainly should have been returned a lot sooner than it is. And so just thrilled that he gets this moment back. And now we get the content because of it. Reggie seems like a guy, we've already seen him in like Wendy's ads and stuff. He's been on TV. He gets the game. And so I'm sure he's going to be a welcome addition to the house.
It was a horrific thing to take his Heisman away and take all these things away from him. It's just ridiculous. But it now gives us in the Nissan Heisman house this chance, right, to have a slew new commercials with Reggie Bush in it, hanging the picture up. I'm not going to lie. I like Fansville the best as far as the college commercials. I think those are with the Brian Bosworth and just where they go with kind of the theme throughout. I think they're fantastic.
Listen, we're doing multiverses in damn near every other genre of, TV, movies. What's to say that at some point the folks at Nissan and the folks at Dr. Pepper can't come together to find a way for the Heisman House and the Dr. Pepper Fansville narrative universes to have a little bit of who doesn't love a crossover event? All I'm saying is these have been the two premier universes built around college football. They have both done a remarkable job in taking well-known figures or products and actually making something entertainment. Well, they don't really have to. The Heisman's always going to be there. Dr. Pepper's always going to be there. But instead, they have gone above and beyond. So I'm saying, why stop here? Let's go and let's take this thing all the way to the edge.
I agree. Bring them together. Somehow, some way, people much smarter than us, bring them together.
Now kiss, but not like full-on dolphin nibbles that make people bleed. Just something a little more gentle, a little more loving, something family-friendly that you can air on television. Speaking of family-friendly, we're right here, and I'm still calling him Dad. If you like that, make sure you download, subscribe, rate, and review the show. Leave it a 5-star rating. Thanks so much. We'll talk to you guys tomorrow.